Okay, let's talk about leadership. And no, we're not talking about that get stuff done, be the boss kind of leadership. No, no, I'm talking about something a little more controversial. Specifically, we're going to talk about the differences and the crossover between being a servant leader and a benevolent dictator. Sounds big, right? Like you read it and you're like, whoa, I don't even know what that means, but I'm intrigued. Don't worry, I'll break it down for you. Now, a benevolent dictator is the kind of leader who looks you straight in the eyes and says, I'm a good dictator because I said so. It's like being the nice guy, but also the boss who doesn't really care for feedback unless it's to hear, you're doing a great job, keep it up. And then they just move on. Benevolent dictators tend to make decisions by themselves, but they do it because they genuinely want to help everyone. They want to do what's best for the group. But here's the thing, they still make the final call every time, every single time. It's like, yeah, I'm asking for your input, but I already know what's best. Don't get me wrong. Benevolent dictators aren't the same as those evil overlords who only care about themselves. You know, the kind of boss who keeps all the good office snacks in their drawer and uses the copier like it's their personal printer. We're not talking about that kind of dictator. No, we're talking about the nice one who really wants to help, but still runs the show like it's their kingdom. So here's the scenario. I'm sitting down with my buddy. We're talking about putting together a Bible reading plan for the new year. Nothing crazy, just a nice consistent schedule to keep us on track. Our current study plan was to read the Old Testament for 5 days and the New Testament for 2 days. That's 7 days of reading every week. Everyone liked this plan. It was easy to follow, it was balanced, it's got both the Old and the New Testament in there each. It's like a spiritual, well balanced diet. You get the grace and the law, the old and the new, like taking your daily spiritual vitamin. I thought, okay, we're just tweaking the plan a bit, maybe make it a little more exciting. But then, plot twist, he hits me with this idea. Let's do one book at a time, real slow and thoughtful. We'll read one book each week and use study guides to really understand the material. Like, we'll do Genesis this week, then Matthew next week, then Exodus, then Acts, and so on. Old Testament one week, New Testament the next. I'm like, hold on, dude. You're trying to turn our spiritual growth into a force fed download of data. This is not a Bible reading boot camp. I love the mix of the Old and the New Testament. It feels like a well balanced diet of grace and law, and I think it's better to read a little bit of both each week. After going back and forth about the details of the new reading plan, I asked a crucial question. So, if 5 of us want to stick with the current reading plan, but you want to try this new one, what happens? My buddy leans in all serious and says, I want what's best for the group. That's why I asked for input. But in the end, I'm still making the final decision. I thought, wait a second, and then asked, so this isn't a democracy. We don't actually get a vote. My friend looks at me like I just asked him if unicorns are real. He was in total disbelief, clearly surprised I'd even asked such a question. And then he laughed as if to say, don't be silly. He takes a moment to compose himself and says, there's no such thing as a democracy. Like I told you, people want a benevolent dictator. They want leaders to ask for their opinion, but in the end, they want the leader to ultimately make the decision. At first, I was a little irritated. But then, bam, it hit me like a ton of bricks. This conversation made me realize I've been doing the exact same thing in my own life. I just didn't intentionally own the behavior. Like when I ask my wife, hey babe, what do you want to eat for dinner tonight? And she says, Mexican. And I'm like, nah, we're having Chinese. It's like, yeah, I'm asking for your input, but I already know what's best. Benevolent dictators tend to make decisions by themselves, but they do it because they genuinely want to help everyone. And then she gives me that look. You know the look. The I thought you asked for my opinion look. She'll be like, I gave you a suggestion. If you already knew what you wanted, why'd you even ask me? And I'm over here thinking, well, I asked you, I listened to what you said, but in the end, I decided what works best. So get ready for the Kung Pao chicken. Oops, looks like I'm a benevolent dictator as well. Go figure. Now, while my friend was intentionally trying to be a benevolent dictator, I was being the accidental benevolent dictator of my own household. Isn't that funny how that works? Here's the thing. Being a benevolent dictator isn't always a bad thing. Research shows that benevolent dictators lead in a way that feels considerate, like, hey, I'm making these decisions for your good, so trust me. And you know what? There's some truth to that. Sometimes someone needs to make a decision. Sometimes it's okay to take charge, even if people don't love it at first. Take Jesus, for example. He's often called a servant leader, but honestly, I'd argue that he was kind of the saintly version of a benevolent dictator. Think about it. He was always trying to help others, always kind and compassionate, but you know what else? He wasn't afraid to make the hard decisions when needed. When it comes to compassion, Jesus loved everyone, from lepers to tax collectors. In regard to servanthood, he washed his disciples' feet, literally got down on his hands and knees and scrubbed the grime off their nasty feet. If that's not leading by example, I don't know what is. As for listening, he listened to people's concerns, but he also knew when it was time to lay down the law and take charge. Romans 5 says, while we were still enemies of the one and only living God, Jesus died on a cross so that you and I could be reconciled to our Creator. Now, you can't get more selfless than that. Here's the kicker. Even with Jesus, who by all accounts is the gold standard of leadership, people still had issues with his approach. It's like no matter how many miracles he performed, there's always that one guy who's like, yeah, I know you're the Son of God, but what about my preferences, Jesus? Why didn't you address my concerns? So, my friend with his benevolent dictator game plan was a bit like Jesus, minus the foot washing and more of the Bible reading schedule. Now, let's be real. There are going to be problems when you're the boss. Even when you're trying to be a nice, benevolent dictator, people might not agree with your choices, and that's tricky. You want to make the right decision, but at the same time, you don't want to make people feel like their opinions don't matter, because everyone wants to feel heard, right? Whether you're a servant leader or a benevolent dictator, you've got to find the right balance. You have to master leadership traits like compassion, listening, and receiving feedback. Sometimes you need to listen more. Sometimes you need to take charge. But it's important to remember that the people around you, your family, your coworkers, your friends, your teammates, they want to feel like they matter. They want to feel heard. Here's the thing though. Whether you're a servant leader or a benevolent dictator, you have to realize that both leadership styles have their toxic traits. For example, a servant leader can sometimes be so focused on serving that they lose sight of making hard decisions. They might worry too much about being liked or about everyone's feelings and forget they're supposed to lead. On the other hand, a benevolent dictator can sometimes be too controlling, thinking they know what's best all the time and not taking enough time to actually listen to others. It's like they've got this plan and they know it's the best plan, but if they're not careful, people feel like their opinions don't matter at all. So here's the bottom line. Whether you're the boss at work, at home, or in a group, it's not about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about listening, making decisions when you need to, and knowing when to step back and let others lead. Leadership is all about balance, and the better you balance your approach, the better the outcome will be. Now, let me leave you with this. A benevolent dictator is way better than a malevolent dictator. So choose kindness, be a good leader who listens, even if you're the one making the decision. All right, class. Now, who thinks they could call themselves a servant leader but still operate as a benevolent dictator?